When I was 21 years old, I got a job out in Seattle, and I packed up my Honda Civic and moved out there. My grandmother, I am told my father, "You can't let her move out. She doesn't even know how to change." So my dad taught me how to change a tire, and I drove to Seattle. Good thing, because, well, all kinds of things. What's going on today? Weird. Um, I did end up having 2 flat tires within the first year and a half that I lived out there. And I know there are people in this world who never have flat tires in their lives, who actually have cars too. So it's a very weird thing. I'll just tell you, on I-5 in between Seattle and Tacoma, there's a lot of traffic, and it was raining out, and I was with a new friend of mine, and she said to me, "This is like the worst kind of weather to get a flat tire in." And I looked at her and I was like, "Oh, honey, you have no idea what the worst kind of weather to get a flat tire in is. Like 45 and rainy is definitely not the worst kind of weather to get a flat tire in." But truthfully, while I was in a car with a new friend on that day, mostly I didn't know anyone in Seattle at all. I went from college, where I was surrounded by all of my people, some of my closest friends ever, to no one. My colleagues at church that I worked with were all near retirement. You people who are in your 20s now, you're thinking, yeah, like us here. But no, I'm talking about like 65, not 55. Oh, it's only 10 years away. Okay. Gotcha. The kids in my youth group were the closest people to my age, and they were high schoolers, of course. And I spent a great deal of time with them. On my days off, I would think to myself, if something happened to me today, no one would even think to look for me until like Tuesday morning when I didn't show up for staff meeting. I mean, when you live alone, that's just kind of the reality, even when you do have a lot of people around you. It was just a really new experience for me then, the experience I had of nobody knowing me, which is both like freeing and also scary, both of those things together. Today we have in the scripture a beautiful poem that talks about being known by God in a really intimate way. "God, you have searched me and known me when I rise and when I sleep, to the highest mountain, the deep depths. There's nowhere I can go where you aren't known by God." I wonder if this story was written by someone who had an experience like Jonah, right? Like because he boarded the ship to try to get away from God and God's calling, and then there was the storm, and then they threw him overboard because they thought that he might be the reason for the storm, and then he ends up in the belly of the whale, according to this story anyway. Even there, God is with him. Last week, when we started our summer series of exploring God as being at least as creative and quirky and curious as all of us, we started talking about these big cosmic things, about the beginning of time, and about leading to like how God is still speaking today, since God creates out of words. And has a way of the words have a way of taking on flesh and dwelling among us. But this week we have a very different picture of this creative God. We have this intimate picture of a creator who knits us together in our mother's wombs, who hems us in. And I kind of love that crafty image for God, as we have our knitters back here. God as knitter, imagine that. God as sewer. It brings to mind images of standing on stools in my grandmother's basement with my grandmother on another stool kneeling around me with pins in her mouth, pinning up the hem of the dress that she was sewing for me. Imagine that might be an image of God. Me. God created me. Not just the day and the night, not just the waters and the dry land, not just the animals in general, but like this little fingernail. And you, of course. that eyelash. That part of you that was one thing for a while but is now something totally different. That part of you that is smart and knows what to do, and that part of you that is scared and wants to hide from the world. See if this rings true. Because I think this might have been like, I'll just say I think this was an experience of a lot of people who were gay for a long time, and I'm not sure that it is anymore. So those of you who are in our Gen Z place, you can tell me how, or Alpha. Are you our only Alpha person? Ben and Will, do you qualify as Alpha? Do you know? They're going to be cuspers, aren't they? Yeah. So I'm not sure. We'll see if this rings true for you, depending on what age you are. But it seems like a lot of people that I know who've had the experience of coming out, they had this experience of thinking it was going to be a really, really big deal to tell someone that they're queer in some way. But then they have that experience where when they finally get the words out of their mouth, this loved one is not surprised at all, and they kind of just knew. Like, oh yeah. One friend that I have who texted me this morning, he's like, are you free? I'm like, dude, it's Sunday morning, you know me. So no, I'm not free. But anyway, back when he came out a long time ago to his best friend, also my best friend, Steve was like, cool. You want to play video games? Like, he was just waiting. This God who knows what breaks your heart, what I was trying to say is like that image of like thinking that you have deep, dark secrets is like a small piece of that, a very small piece of understanding how it is that God just knows us and knows things about us before we even maybe know them ourselves. This God who knows what breaks your heart and what makes you sing, what is going to hurt now, but eventually leads to a place of freedom and purpose. This God who knows what effed up thoughts you have sometimes, where your self-doubt is, who and what you are jealous of, what confuses you, where your blind spots are and what makes you shine, where you are all the time because you're living in creation. And guess what? God made all of it. Or maybe it would be better today. We're all living in creating. That's what I was trying to say. It would be better today, since we're thinking about this creative God, to think about how we're living in creating. Not living in creation that's like already done, but living in the process of creating. Since it's always happening and we're living in it, and maybe we're a part of it, we are also creating, co-creators along with God. And God's numerous thoughts that are too weighty, too vast, and for us to comprehend encompass all of who you are too, and all of who we are, and all of all is, and all means all. And that could be scary, I think, like that old Police song, every breath you take, every move you make, every single day, every step you take, I'll be watching you. We know this song to be a little stalkerish. But if we can instead understand that it from a God perspective, if you can hear it as being sung from God, then it's about never being alone in a good way. Centuries later, after the story of Jonah gets told, and after the Psalm of 139 gets written, we have Paul, the leader in the church who went to all kinds of places and spread what he had experienced as good news from God when he learned about the grace and love of Jesus Christ. He says to us in a text that we often hear at funerals, "For I am convinced that neither death nor life nor angels nor demons, neither the present nor the future, nor any powers, neither height nor depth, nor anything else in all of creation will be able to separate us from the love of God." Nothing can separate us from the love of God. Where can I go to hide from your spirit? Nowhere, because there's nothing that separates us from that. It's in us, in this world that's in its creative process all of the time. Jesus, the Word made flesh, met a woman at the well one day. We hear this story in John 4, and I don't think we know the whole conversation, but we do know that she was a woman and she was alone, and it was the middle of the day and she was getting water, which meant she was probably, for whatever reason on the outs, had been voted off the island by the people in her village, some kind of not included in community. Their conversation, Jesus and this woman's, started with Jesus asking for a drink of water, and then somehow they got on the subject of the 6 men that she had been with, married to the first 5, but not the current one. And after their conversation, this woman goes running back to her village, and she says to them, "Come and meet the man who has told me everything I have ever done." And this was apparently good news for her. Some of you know that I lost a friend a couple weeks ago. Brian was his name. Brian also lived alone. So this is one of the reasons why I've been thinking about those early years in Seattle and what it was like to live alone before Brian became my roommate for a little while. And he still lived out there, lived alone, so his body wasn't found until he was missing at an event a couple days later. Hard. Except that I don't believe that he was alone. I believe that he was known and loved and with God in every breath that he took. He was known when he laid down that night, and he was known when he didn't rise the next day. And he was known in every breath that he took, and he was known beyond when the breathing stopped. Brian was known and loved intimately by the creative God who fashioned him in his mother's womb. Known that whole time and known still, like we all are. All are part of this creating, living world, but known down to the bruised spot underneath the toenail where you dropped the chair. Known to the deep, dark things you don't tell people about. Known in the things you only share with the ones that you trust. Known before you knew yourself. All of it. You're just never alone. God's next to you, crafting with pins in her mouth. I don't know how she does at changing tires, but I'm confident that you won't be alone in it. Amen.